Welcome to our podcast, Raising Big. This podcast is an ongoing conversation between myself and my young adult son. We're ready and willing to talk about things that families might experience in their lives and relationships, both as parents and young adults, from teens to 20-somethings. The good, the bad, and the sometimes ugly. In this episode, we're talking about the situation when a young adult wants to make a pivot or life choice that the parent doesn't necessarily agree with and how to navigate that change. I know from a parent perspective, it can be a little unsettling when it seems like all of a sudden your child no longer wants to follow the plan. A lot of time, energy, and money is spent on both sides of the relationship equation trying to decide on the path for the young adult's life after high school. But sometimes we changed our mind or things don't work out. Let's dive in. I'm Marcy. I'm the mom.
I'm Cade, and I'm her kid. Whether you're the kid or the parent in this situation, it can make for a string of challenging conversations about what decision you would like to make. A pivot could mean deciding not to go to college at all after high school, to get a job right after high school, or to learn a trade, take a gap year. There's so many different options. You could maybe start at one college and switch to another, switch majors halfway through your process in college, or just drop out altogether, take a gap year, take some time to think about what you'd like to do. Either way, there's so many different options of plans for kids to make after their high school journey and when they kind of venture off into adulthood. From the young adult viewpoint, a change in plan can sometimes be a little bit stressful. You know, kind of like my mom said earlier, there's kind of that stereotypical plan after high school of you graduate high school, you go to college, you graduate college, you get your job in your field, and then, you move on through life. But I think with my generation, a lot of that has switched between people either not going to college or going to college right away or going to a trade school or starting a job or starting their own business. There's so many different options. And I feel, at least from my perspective, I feel like that's a lot more society wise accepted easier than it used to be back in the day. I know we had a conversation about that previously about just how it used to be, everybody went and did the same thing. And now I feel like there's a little bit more freedom for kids to change their plan and change their mind. So a change in plan can be very stressful. It can be a lot to weigh your different options, to compare, what you're doing versus your friends. And also, it can be a little stressful if you aren't following the plan that your parents maybe thought that you would. Mom, I imagine that for you, a quick unexpected pivot from your kid can throw a parent for a loop. And parents even make quick decisions sometimes and pivots in life. So why is it hard when your kid does the same, and how does that affect you, and what does that process look like for you?
Yeah, so I think for a parent, when you're making a pivot on your own, right, you just think that's part of adulting. But when your child then is making a pivot, let's say all throughout their experience in, typically middle school, high school, sometimes it starts before that, but you just kind of assume they're on a path to go to college. And that might have to do, I know at our high school, there was you kind of picked a path as far as when you were choosing your classes of where you thought you might end up. And it was in an attempt to best prepare you for what might come after high school. But a lot of times, even kids who followed that whole path, like it might have been halfway through the summer before they were supposed to leave for college. And all of a sudden they're like, yeah, I'm not going. And parents are like,
Mm-hmm.
what? Or they're like, no, you know what? I don't want to go to college. Let's say partway through their senior year, like, I don't want to go to college. I've decided I want to be an electrical lineman or whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to go down a different road, or I'm so uncertain what I want to do, I think I'm just going to take a year off and get a job, or I'm going to go backpack around Europe if they have the financial means to do so. I think there's just a lot of different choices kids can make, and when the assumption has been made that a certain order of things are going to happen, or that you've been preparing your child for all these years for what you thought was going to happen, and maybe even what they thought was going to happen, it can just be a little disconcerting when all of a sudden your kid's like, no, I'm not doing that after all. And
Mm-hmm.
so as a parent, I think that is why it's hard, because you're invested in their outcomes, and sometimes you're invested beyond a point where you really should be if this were a healthy relationship. But every parent wants their child to be successful and wants their child to be happy and wants their child to be stable and safe. And there's just certain things that as a parent, you want your child to be. Now, if you're making a choice for yourself as a parent, you've got a certain confidence in your own self that you can pull that off, right? And that there's not going to be a lot of repercussions. But kids don't have a lot of life experience. So when they're making changes like that, sometimes that's what makes parents, I think, kind of, they're taken aback when all of a sudden their child is just completely doing a 180, or even a deeper dive than that, and just doing something completely unscripted and
Mm-hmm.
that the parent was not expecting. So Does that make sense, Kate, that that's why it would
Yeah,
feel different for a parent to do that?
for sure. Like you said, like as a parent, you have a lot more life experience. But the way I kind of look at it is making those pivots and those decisions as a kid is what gives you the life experience.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able, you as an older adult now can say, okay, when I was 20, I made this decision and it didn't work out for me, so I'm not going to do that again. Or,
Right.
oh, when I was 20, I made this decision and it did work out for me, so I'm going to do that again. So I think that as a parent, it's important to give your kid that leeway to make those decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's equally as important, to give your advice and, speak from your place of having gone through some of those struggles already. But I think at the end of the day, it really is important to learn and make those decisions on your own. And if it, is something that just from a kid perspective, it's something that I really want to do, I'm, going to do it regardless. Or if it's something I don't want to do, I'm not going to do it. But again, I think that all just morphs into you gaining that life experience and you learning
Mm-hmm.
from that. Obviously, it makes a difference if it's something that puts your child in danger or things like that. But for the most part, I think that it's important to allow kids to make those decisions. And if they fail, important to let them fail. Or if they succeed, important to let them succeed and celebrate that success with them. Just because we're not going to learn any other way. That's how we learn life. That's how we navigate and then make better decisions in the future. So that way, there's going to come a point where our parents aren't around and we're going to
Mm-hmm.
be able to make those decisions on our own instead of always having you there to weigh our options.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think it benefits you as a young adult, right, to not have all of that life experience because it makes you potentially less afraid of what,
Mm-hmm.
you can't be afraid of what you don't know, right? Where your parents, because they have lived a lot of life and maybe have gotten some bumps and bruises along the way by making decisions, are maybe less likely to take those risks or do what they really want to do out of fear, right? Based out of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so I agree with you that when you're a kid, you need to be allowed to make your own mistakes. And failure has such a negative connotation in society, and maybe we should do a whole podcast episode about failure. But
Mm-hmm.
it's, to me, it's just a lesson to learn what not to do next time, how to do it better next time, what you might change about how you did it. It's not really a failure because the only failure is someone who didn't try, someone who didn't
Mm-hmm.
take the risk, right? So I love that you said that it's like, that's how you're going to learn. Parents sometimes wish their kids could learn from their mistakes, but we all
Mm-hmm.
know in reality, like most kids don't learn from other people's mistakes. They learn from their own. And
Yep.
if they are a child who's willing to take what you say as gospel and they're not willing to take any other risks alone, you probably have a child who's completely living out of fear based on what you've told them. And they're not willing to take risks for their own life because they're so petrified and so scared because of the horror stories they've heard of the mistakes
Mm-hmm.
you've made, right? So always encouraging your kid to follow their heart, because the last thing you want is a kid who's invested years and years of their time and their money doing something that they knew back when they were a high school senior they didn't want to do, or they knew halfway through their college degree that they didn't want to do XYZ, but they were so petrified of making that switch that all of a sudden they find themselves with a degree and zero interest in working,
Mm-hmm.
in that field or ever using that. So Kate, a lot of times when the kid has known that a change is coming for a while, they've thought it through. They usually have a plan. Sometimes they've even taken action on that plan. They've changed their major. They've withdrawn themselves from school. They've already applied to another school. Why do you think they hesitate to share that with their parents earlier on in the process? Like when it's just a nugget of an idea, why do you think they wait until it's a big, huge announcement of, oh, by the way, mom, I know it's July 15th, but I'm not going back to college ABC in
Mm-hmm.
August. I'm going to get a job and I'm just going to stay home, or whatever the situation might be. Why do they
Yeah, for
wait?
sure. I think it could be for a number of reasons. One, I think kind of like you said, bringing it up when it's just a nugget of an idea. Sometimes when it is just that idea, we don't know if it's going to happen. So to me as a kid, let's say I'm in school and I'm planning on uh, transferring schools in the fall. If I'm just thinking about that, let's say in March or April before I transfer schools, I'm not gonna tell you if it's not gonna happen. Something might change, and in August, I'm just gonna keep going back to the same school I was at. So there's almost kind of like that. There's no point in saying anything until it's actually happening. I think sometimes too, a lot of kids do it to, for lack of a better word, kind of prove to their parent that they
Mm,
can, make a decision or make a choice or change their life on their own. it's almost kind of like that, okay, I'm an adult, like I can do this now, so I'm going to. And I think, if we're talking about the topic of school, changing your major, things like that, at the end of the day, it is your kid's life and it is, what, however they want to live it. So if they decide they don't, they're not doing the best thing, they're not, doing their best at that school, then it ultimately is up to them to make that choice to switch. But on the other hand, I also do think that it can be beneficial to talk to your parent, early on in your plans. I think both kind of have pros and cons. Like I said, there is kind of that independence of not telling them, and that, I made this decision for myself and, this is what I wanted to do. But also, like we talked about earlier, is your parents have that life experience. And I think it also can depend on your relationship with your parent. If you have that relationship where I can come to you and I can talk to you and say, hey, I'm not really happy at this school, so I'm thinking of transferring to this school, in the fall. Here's why I chose this school. Here's why I think it's going to be better. Here's blah, blah, blah. I think some kids have that relationship with their parents to where they're able to go and talk to them. But I also think some kids don't have that relationship with their parents, and they're either not able to talk to them about it, or they're afraid their parents are going to shoot their ideas down, or whatever the situation is. So I think that if you're a parent and you want your kid to tell you, earlier on in their plans and not wait until it's the end, just really focus on being open-minded and hearing them out when they do come to you with ideas. And also focus on being involved. Ask them what's going on. Ask them how they're liking their school or how they're liking their major, things like that. I think that can help open that door for that conversation.
Yeah, I think I love the point that you made about them being afraid that their parents are going to shoot their idea down. And again, we talked a little bit at the beginning about how invested parents have been in getting their child to the point that they're 18, right? And they're ready to go out there and be a good human and be a good citizen of the world and conquer whatever their plan or dream has been. And so I do think there is a legit piece of, as a parent going, my child wants to do what? Like, that's not what we planned. Like, that's what we agreed to. And then being worried that let's use the example of a child switching schools, right? Because we dealt with that as a family. Your child goes and they spend a semester or they spend a year at a school and they realize it's not the right school for them and that they want to make a switch for a variety of reasons. And if they haven't done any homework, that can be a little scarier. But as a parent who went through that, my child who made that switch, talked to me about why they wanted to make the switch, what their plans were. Like, they had thought it all through, but hadn't taken any action yet. And so, especially if you're looking at a situation, this was not our situation, but if you're looking at a situation where your parent is financially footing the bill for you, you might want to give them a heads up if it has an economic impact, right? Like, if you're going from a community college and you want to switch to a 4-year school, or you're going from a state school and you want to switch to a private college, and you're expecting your parent to just absorb that change, that's a conversation you might want to have before you make that decision, and all of a sudden find yourself the child holding this huge amount of debt, right? Because your parents are like, ooh, we can't afford that. There's just conversations that may need to happen. But I definitely understand the child's perspective of being afraid that their parent is either going to shoot down their ideas or just blatantly shut them down, and say, no, you need to finish this out, because there are people out there who have that mindset, right, wrong, or indifferent, lucky for you or not. You were raised by a parent who was like, if at any time you change your mind, let me know. And we will make that pivot. But that's because I had made decisions when I was younger that I wish I would have known then what I know now, because no one ever had the conversation with me. What do you want your life to look like after college? I maybe would have picked a different major. I maybe would have done something differently if I would have had those conversations. We didn't know to have those conversations back in the early 80s. That wasn't a thing, especially as a first generation college student and a female. And so I think now it is definitely different, but I get it why kids would be a little hesitant to share those big ideas with their parents, or to just do it to prove that they can. I'm an adult now, right? I'm going to make this decision and I'm going to follow through on it without even running it past you. It happens, and it happens frequently. And I think as parents, if you can just expect that that's probably going to happen at some time. Your kids don't need your permission. And that's a hard thing as a parent to realize, that your kid doesn't need to ask you permission to live their life anymore. That's not a thing. So, so definitely, Cade, I loved that point that you made.
For sure. I was going to ask, kind of like you brought up, do you have any advice for, parents whose kids are coming to them with a new plan or a change? And how, as a parent, can you choose to react that would maybe lead to a more positive outcome or allow your kid to be more
Right.
open with you in the future? And, what does that look like if you don't agree with your kid's choice versus if you
Right.
do? If your kid comes to you and says, hey, I want to, take a gap year and I'm going to do this and blah, blah, blah. And if you think that's a great idea, it's easy to support that.
Hmm.
How do you go about that if maybe you don't support that? And what does that look like as a parent?
Yeah, I think if you're a type of person that's going to be very reactive and maybe not in a positive way, if your child comes at you with something like that, and I would say if you've got a sophomore, a junior, a senior right now, if you've got a kiddo in college right now or a kiddo that's going to be graduating this next year, like prepare yourself that at some point
Mm-hmm.
this is going to happen. And if you are a reactionary parent, you have the ability to give yourself the gift of time. So if your child comes to you and says, I want to make XYZ pivot, you can say, oh, that's interesting. Let me go think about that for a little bit. You are under no obligation to respond in the moment to something that has surprised you. And so a lot of times I think the immediate response that a parent would give might come off as brash or shutting you down, or even if you're not intending it to be that way. You're curious, you got a bunch of questions, you want to know how well they've thought this through, you want to know what the implications might be for them, and that is a whole lot to put back on your kid who has just told you their dream has changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as a parent, give yourself that gift of time if you know you are reactionary. But if you can approach it from a place of curiosity, oh, tell me more about that. Tell me why you want to make that pivot. Tell me what attracted you to XYZ school, or what you'd love to do in your gap year, or why you've decided you want to be an electrical lineman or whatever that might
Mm-hmm.
be. If you can approach it from curiosity and gain more information about why it is your child made the choice, it's going to be a much more positive outcome, because when you're asking questions to actually understand rather than sitting there in your head and judging everything they're telling you to see if it holds up to a standard, right? You're not going to keep those lines of communication
Mm-hmm.
open. That's going to shut down right away. And what you're doing then is you're not only affecting that conversation, you're hurting your relationship with your child, because then the next time they have some big thing to come and talk to you about, they're going to be in their head, oh, remember that time that I went to go tell my parents that I wanted to switch colleges and that didn't go well. And even though I
Mm-hmm.
ended up switching colleges anyway, because like you said, the kids should do what it is they want to do with their life,
Mm-hmm.
but they're going to know that that didn't go well, and they're not going to forget that. So as a parent, if you've made that mistake and you've overreacted, like there's parents right now hearing that their kid doesn't want to go back to school in August. If you overreacted when your child first told you that, it's not too late to circle back and say to them, hey, I overreacted, and adopt that compassionate, curious
Mm-hmm.
stance, right? And go at it from there. And if you don't agree with your child's choice, like, you get to have your opinion. That doesn't mean you get to share it. It's okay to not agree with your child, but it is their life. And, so you can have your opinion. If you have concerns, you can share those without judgment. If you want to have a successful conversation with your child about it, if you hope to have any influence at all on them making a healthy decision, you need to make sure that you're approaching it from a healthy approach, right, Cade? Like,
For sure. I
just no judgment.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree. Like as a kid, even if your parent doesn't agree with you, there's a way that you can as a parent, there's a way that you can word that, disagreement without it
Mm-hmm.
being judgmental, or without it being sounded like you're disappointed, or without it being like, oh no, you shouldn't do that because I'm the parent and I think you should do this. I mean, there's been times where, I've thought about doing things, whether it's in my career or school or just personal life or whatever, and I've talked to you about it, and you've said, oh, well, have you thought about, what this looks like or what that looks like? So I think from a parent, something that as a kid I receive well is you kind of planting a thought or asking a question versus telling me. So
Mm-hmm.
let's say I was still in school and I wanted to transfer schools to, New York, instead of you saying, oh, that's so far away, you're never going to see us, you're never going to come home, it's going to be so cold, it's going to be like, if you just list the negatives, that
Mm-hmm.
as a kid is going to come across more of, oh, my parent just doesn't agree with my idea and they just don't want me to do it and whatever. And like you said, in turn, the kid's going to do whatever they want to do anyways.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I feel like you always word yours is, oh, well, have you thought about, how far you're going to be away from home, and how, now you're going to have to fly home and blah, blah, blah. Or have you thought about what the weather's like in the winter? Or have you thought about how busy the city is and that you're not going to be able to drive your car? Or, you know what I mean? There's different ways
Mhm.
where you can word it. And I feel like kind of opening it up as a question or as an idea makes it less judgmental and kind of comes off
Mhm.
less brash than just, expressing how you feel.
For sure. So, in the spirit of keeping lines of communication open, what would you tell your peers that are considering popping a big change in their life on their parents, potentially out of the blue, right?
For sure.
And it's probably a decision that their parents are kind of invested in with what we're talking about today. What would you say to those young adults that are right on the precipice of sharing this information with their
Hmm.
parents?
For sure. Like I said earlier, it definitely depends on the relationship you have with your parent. And that's the thing I want to, acknowledge is not everyone has a relationship with their parent where the line of communication is always open, or not everyone has a relationship with their parent where, maybe they turned 18 and their parent, doesn't provide for them and isn't interested in their life
Mhm.
anymore. So in that case, it may not be worth, talking to your parent about it because they don't have any interest in it. It's not affecting them at all, and they maybe haven't supported you through the first half of this decision. So, it might not be the best choice for you to tell them about the next step. But I think if you do have that relationship with your parent or you want to build that relationship with your parent, just something about keeping that lines of communication open, like you said, telling them about the idea while it's early on, asking for ideas instead of maybe just saying, hey, I'm going to do this. Like we said earlier, parents have a lot of that life experience where I can say, hey, mom, hey, dad, I'm not happy at this college, or I'm not happy with this major, or, I'm not happy with, what my plan was after high school. I'm thinking about changing it. You can even ask, like, what do you think I should do? Or, how would you think through the process? I think coming to them at an earlier point in that decision can sometimes
Mhm.
be beneficial to, like you said, allow them to feel included, allow them to be there to support you along the way versus you doing it completely by yourself and then just
Mhm.
kind of popping it on them. Because as a parent, that is a lot to digest if your kid just comes to you and has this big life change and they just kind of expect you to
Mhm.
go along with it. I think that can make a difference for sure.
Yeah, and if you're asking your parent, which I think is a great idea, hey, what do you think I should do? Like, you're valuing their opinion, but I think as a parent, it's important to remember if your child asks you what you think they should do, it doesn't mean they have to do that. They're just
Hmm.
wanting your opinion on what you think the right thing is. And it's not that they're defying you or that they think you're stupid or that it's just that your idea that you shared might not be in full alignment with that choice that they're making for their life. But I think it's a great honor to you that they care and love you enough to ask you the question,
For sure.
of what do you think I should do? So, we all have the right to change our mind about the trajectory of our lives at any time. As parents, we need to remember that our young adults are in charge of their own journey. I know that's hard, but I'll say it again. Our young adults are in charge of their own journey. We can guide and advise, which is very different than how it's happening when you're raising littles, right? So, but when you're asked, guide and advise when you're asked. We can have opinions that differ from our kids, but that doesn't mean we have to share them with them. And especially not if our expectation is that we're going to share our opinions and our kid needs to adopt those opinions as their own. They get to have their own opinions and get to make their own choices. So, doesn't mean our own opinions are necessarily wrong. It just means it doesn't fit with theirs. So I think that's important to remember. The sooner you accept that this is their life and it probably isn't going to flow according to some scripted societal norm or the dream that you've had for them since they were born or before they were born, the happier you're all going to be. So choose instead to simply love your child, be their biggest cheerleader, and approach their outcomes from a place of curiosity. A new phase of life for parents too. This might be your first kiddo that's, moving on to adulthood, or it might be your last. But either way, it's changing the dynamic of your household. It's changing the amount of time and energy that you need to be spending on the people that rely on you to raise them. So maybe take some of that energy spent on helping your child get to this point and turn it back on yourself and figure out what your next pivot is. Maybe it's time.
For sure, for sure. And if you're a young adult wanting to make a pivot, I think it's important to really, weigh all your options, talk to people around you, whether it is parents or friends, even resources on social media or the internet, to just, weigh your different options and figure out what it is you want to do and to really understand that there is no right or wrong way to live life. Even if you thought, throughout high school or throughout college, or even if, you're in your 30s or 40s and you want to make a pivot, that's okay. Just because you had a plan of how you're going to live your life, and it doesn't look like that, doesn't mean that it's wrong, or doesn't mean that you failed. It just changes, and life is such a beautiful thing that we all just get to experience and enjoy. So just enjoy it, do what you want to do what you think will make you happy, and really understand that now is a time in your life for exploration and freedom. A lot of people my age don't have kids or don't have a house or aren't married, or are working remotely and can travel or things like that. So I think that if you're at that point in your life where you don't have kids, or you're not responsible for anyone, and you don't have a house holding you down somewhere, or you are in college and you don't have a set job right after college, take that time to explore different areas by traveling, explore different things about yourself by trying new activities, meditating. There's just so much out there to explore and to change in life, and now's the time to do it while you have that freedom. And with that being said, Mom, do you have anything else to add?
Just that, I think if you can approach life as an adventure, whether that be your life or your children's lives, right, it's going to be a lot more fun. It's going to be a lot more interesting. Let them have their time as a young adult. There is enough time in life to be super serious. There is enough time in life to be tied down. There is enough time in life, like, and if they're off doing crazy things in their 20s, at least they lived life on their terms. So life is an adventure. And I would encourage not only the young adults that are making their choices right now, but also people who are, chest deep in the life that they've created, that maybe it doesn't feel like a fit right now. Like, that's why I'm a transition life coach. Like, life is an adventure. Let's live it. And if there's something you feel like you need to pivot on, do it, and encourage your kids to do it too. Encourage your kids to make those pivots and to follow what their dreams are. No one's going to do it for them. And the last thing you want to do is live a life of regret.
For sure. And like you said, now's life is all about pivoting and just enjoying it, whatever that looks like. It looks different for everyone, and it looks different at different phases of your life. What you enjoyed at 20, you're not gonna, for the most part, you're not gonna enjoy at 40. You're not gonna enjoy at 60. You're not gonna enjoy at 80. So really, just figuring out where you're at in life and what works for you. But with all that being said, that is a wrap for this episode of Raising Bigs. Thank you all for listening today. We hope you found some takeaways, a fresh perspective, maybe even an action step or two in this episode, whether it's about, pivoting for yourself, helping a parent through a pivot, or even helping a child through a pivot. Above it all, we hope it opens an opportunity for a conversation between bigs and their parents about their life choices. We are definitely not experts by any means, but we can authentically share what we're learning in hopes of making the path a little bit easier for those around us and those who are listening. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. Please make sure to subscribe and share with those in your circle who you think might benefit from hearing it. Or if you just enjoyed the message, share it with them so they can hear it as well. A new episode of Raising Big comes out every single Monday.
And you can visit my life coaching website at marcyhawkinson.com or email me at lifecoachmarcy@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook at Life Coach Marcy and Instagram at life_coach_Marcy. Where can our listeners find you, Cade?
They can find me. My handles across all social media platforms is just the Cade Berrigan. That's Instagram, Twitter, everything is all there. The best way to contact us, whether you want to give us feedback about an episode, ask us questions, or give us a topic idea, is to DM either one of us on social media, or you can reach out via the contact me page on my mom's website. Again, that is marcyhawkinson.com. We appreciate any feedback, topic ideas, or questions you guys may have. And with that being said, we will see you next time on Raising Bigs.
Bye, Cade.
Bye, Mom.